Welcome, everyone, to the Ecopsychology Café. Hello, my name is Carol Koziol, and I'm the founder of the Canadian Ecopsychology Network, the host of this series. Monica Dragoz and I co-created this program. Today, I'll be sharing stories from my recent trip to South America to illustrate the paradox of last chance travels. But before we start, I'd like to acknowledge that I live in the traditional territory of the ancestral and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq people under the treaties of peace and friendship. I offer gratitude to the Indigenous peoples who live here now and who have lived here for thousands of years, for the legacy of caring for the land, water, fire, and air. I acknowledge the many creatures and living beings whose habitat was here and is here today. I acknowledge the ongoing impacts of colonization and systemic oppression of the people and the land on which we reside. Today, as we discuss the paradox of travels, I invite all of us to uncolonize our work to embrace wider systems of care and concern. So this is not going to be a typical travel log bragging about all the cool places I've been. Rather, I attempt to discuss the paradox of traveling to witness and experience a place before it disappears, while fully knowing the heavy environmental impact of traveling to those places. Since it isn't always possible to answer a paradox, I'll review some reasons and problems of travel. And then I'll share 4 stories from my journeys to South America. And then at the end, we'll have a little time for some open and respectful discussion. So why do we travel? Why do you travel? For adventure, to get stretched out of your comfort zone, to experience a different culture or meet new people, learn a new language. For relaxation, escape reality, or all of the above. What are the problems with travel? Well, over-tourism actually is a global problem because there's overconsumption of limited local resources, water, food, energy. Even when there's not enough for the locals, we somehow have to find it for the tourists. There's also a very heavy carbon footprint from flights and all kinds of travels, and there's increased vehicle travel, pollution, degradation of public spaces, noise pollution, excess trash and garbage, and economic over-reliance. And we saw what happened with that when COVID came in, and a lot of places struggled because there was no more tourism. So what's this last chance business about? Well, last chance actually psychologically triggers a desire to visit a place. And the travel industry has really leveraged this to get people to travel more. Psychologically, there's a stronger reaction when there's a risk of loss than when there's a chance for gain. So places such as the Amazon rainforest, Galapagos Islands, Patagonia, Great Barrier Reef, Antarctica, the Great Wall of China, or Machu Picchu, people are flocking to visit because they want to see it before it disappears from climate change, but also from over-tourism. And since this is an eco-psychology event, I'm going to focus on nature-based travels, but we do know that over-tourism and climate change are affecting other parts and other places that are traveled as well. So nature-based travels is going to be the focus. Well, when I was thinking about this, I ran across this work from Alan Grenier out of the University of Montreal, who kind of summed up approach to nature-based tourism. There's 2 schools of thoughts that continue to challenge the future of nature-based tourism. Nature as a foreground for boosting one's egocentricity for distinction and self-esteem, versus a more caretaking approach where nature is preserved for the rejuvenation of the soul. And when I was thinking of this, I distilled it down to ego travel, which includes bucket lists, trophy travels, bragging rights, social media selfies, and eco-travel, which is the more caretaking approach and includes an acknowledgement that nature rejuvenates us, and we have a responsibility for care, conservation, a giving back, and a reciprocity. And when I say rejuvenation of the soul, I mean the human soul, but also the world soul as well, too. And then when I looked at ego and eco, I thought, you know what? This kind of relates to Linda Bazell, her level 1 and level 2 ecotherapy. Level 1 ecotherapy happens when we use nature to heal ourselves, versus a level 2 approach, which includes reciprocity. With nature, we heal with nature, and there's more of a whole systems understanding of the human nature relationship. And it's through this lens, ego and eco, foreground and caretaking, that I'm going to move forward and share some stories. But first of all, what's my why to travel? And I think this is important for us to consider as well, too. And it all started with my 92-year-old mom selling her home in London, Ontario, and moving into a senior's residence. You see, her home, which she had lived in for 35 years, had been kind of my sanctuary for over 3 decades. And in the last 15 years, I had lived off and on with my mom. So all of a sudden, I felt emotionally homeless. And this really hit me because I was thinking, oh my goodness, what am I going to do at the end of the year? What am I going to do? How am I going to celebrate solstice, Christmas, New Year's? Because I usually hung out with my mom. My sons have plugged into their partners' families, and I didn't feel like shoehorning or imposing myself. So I thought, you know what, it's time to do something completely different. And I have always gone to nature to reflect and heal. So I worked with a mentor and a spiritual advisor, and there was actually a confluence of reasons that started to emerge. And one was that last chance not only applied to travels, but last chance for me. I'm in my high 60s. How many more years am I going to be able to do a big hunga-munga trip around the globe? Also, global stability. We are witnessing collapse of social and ecological places all over the world. So I worked on setting some intentions to travel. And the intentions were acknowledging and honoring endings, honoring and facing death. I will become an orphan in the not too distant future. And the planet is dying as well, too. So then I thought, okay, how can I be in service to? And the intention of conservation, also the intention of community, I'm a community ecopsychologist. How can I become aware of and explore different communities? And then the intention of being open to hidden surprises. We can't script or schedule or do everything. We have to leave some room for that which will emerge. And so this turned into a little rite of passage as I continued to stride into elderhood, and I traveled alone. I went in and I prepared for this trip for 8 months. It wasn't a dash and go kind of thing. And I chose to travel off peak season. I used local South American tour operators and slow travel routes. I prepared physically, I prepared culturally, especially I wanted to learn about the Indigenous history of all the places I was going to, not just visit the glorified colonial churches and museums. I was very aware and stayed current with the geopolitics. I registered with all the embassies. South America has been known to have lots of protests and coups d'etats. I also prepared spiritually, and I journaled before, during, and after. I'm still journaling and reflecting, but also because mom was the catalyst for these travels, I decided to write a letter to my mom on a regular basis, sharing with her where I was going and what was going on. And the blind copy behind my email to my mom was my council of allies who were aware of what was going on, but also who had checked in on me, and they still do. I also wanted to leave a softer impact on my travels. Number one is I didn't want to leave 150 plastic water bottles, so I got a water bottle, a silicone bottle with a built-in filter into it. And I took water out of taps, out of streams, creeks, and I didn't get sick. This to me was a really important thing. We don't want to leave plastic when we travel. Also, biodegradable soap, camp suds, which I've been using for decades as an old camper canoeer, which I used on my hair, on my clothes, in the shower. I did not take travel wipes. They do not decompose. So gels, hand sanitizers. I used handkerchiefs. You can't buy Kleenex down in South America very easily. So I used hankies and washed them out at night. And I took a toilet paper roll because lots of places you didn't have toilet paper. So I got a little camp roll and carried that. And then the last thing was I made sure that I had plastic or rubber tips for my trekking poles because I didn't want to add more damage down there. Okay, so where did I go? Well, my Ecotravels were just shy of 8 weeks. And I went through to Colombia, Peru, Argentina, Chile, Antarctica, Uruguay, and Panama. And I acknowledge that I generated a total of 8.3 tons of CO2. I traveled 34,000 kilometers by air, which generated 3.5 tons of CO2. And remarkably, the 1,200 kilometer cruise generated 4.8. Cruising is a real CO2 pig. The average Canadian generates 17.8 tons of CO2 a year. Americans are a little less. So my 2 months of travel was the same as half a year for an average Canadian. But shockingly, if I look at my 2 months of travel, I generated the same as 4 people live in India in 1 year. In the bottom right corner is what my calculations came from. So I'd like to share with you 4 trips and some of the further reflections I have. They started with penguin research because my thrust was conservation. I went down to Antarctica for a little cruise to an eco camp, which demonstrates sustainable accommodation, and then an eco-spiritual thing in Machu Picchu. Earthwatch, I traveled with them 10 years ago to Mongolia. And so that's why I chose them to do some Magellanic penguin research in Patagonia, Argentina. And this happened in a national reserve, Cabo de Bahias in Chubut province. And the land is protected, but the waters are not. So penguins are a keystone species where we can gauge the health of their predators, their prey, and the entire ocean. They're seabirds, but they need to come to land to reproduce. So the research focused on the relationship between the breeding biology and the at-sea foraging effort of adult breeders. This was our group. There was 5 volunteers and 6 scientists from Chile, Argentina, Brazil, and Mexico. We shared in a house. There was a scientist's house and a volunteer's house, and 4 women stayed in bunk beds. It was not posh whatsoever, and we lived and worked together in community, a research community. We were in the field, leaving at 8 o'clock every morning. It was hard work. And we finished up at 5 at night, sometimes 6, and then some of us would go help the researchers key in data. The type of work we shared was scanning adult ID tags, counting chicks and eggs, measuring the growth of chicks, marking the adults as male or female, and then recording results for each nest. Out of the approximately 7,000 breeding pairs that were in this reserve, we monitored 250 nests. This was a very different ecosystem from anything I had been exposed to. It was in a national park and included guanacos, undomesticated llamas on the top left, choicas, rheas similar to ostriches, bottom left, and armadillos, who liked to raid the penguins' nests for their eggs. And then we saw the stray subarctic macaroni penguin living in the colony and wondered if this was evidence of climate change living so far away and on its own. I loved watching the penguins. They're such characters and they're so animated, and just watching their routines. I also loved the semi-arid remote landscape and was mesmerized by the desolate scenery of the Patagonia Plateau. I learned a lot about the life cycle of Magellanic penguins. It was shocking to realize the survival rate from egg to fledglings, which is when they leave the nest and get to the water, is only 1 in 200. So these two little guys here, I saw them one day, and then 3 days later, this chick 1 and chick 2, chick 1 was gone, the bigger one. So every day we witness the cycle of birth, life, and death. From my journal entry, Friday, December 15th, I had a little cry this morning while working in the field. Seeing all the unborn eggs and dead chicks hit me hard. I realized the natural order isn't perfect and not everything survives. I thought about Sarah, my chick 1, and my little brother Andre, both dying days after birth. I acknowledge death is part of imperfect life, and the full cycle of life is not guaranteed to any being. This reminds me that life is such a precious gift. You see, my chick 1 died over 30 years ago, yet I found it interesting how this particular conservation effort in this very different ecosystem somehow catalyzed an inner peace, helping me accept this old wound at a deeper level. My original intention was to participate in a conservation program to support penguin research, but in the process, the natural world catalyzed a reciprocal healing within me. For this, I am truly grateful. The scientists also expressed deep gratitude for the time and money we eco-volunteers donated to this project. The new Argentinian government is pushing to chop funding to current and future environmental efforts. And I really hope I did not participate in the last trailing penguins research program. In Antarctica, my theme was witnessing, and I just want to point out that I chose a fly sail option. In Antarctica, 21 was the brainchild of a Chilean businessman. So we flew from Punta Arenas, Chile to King George Island. And this is a 2-hour flight. If we had got on the boat here, it would be 2 to 3 days across the dreaded Drake Passage. And considering the CO2 impact, I thought this was a friendlier way to travel. I chose a small expedition cruise with only 60 people. And the scientists were from Chile, Argentina, Brazil, UK, and Canada, and half the passengers were from China. So this was a very different nature-based communal experience. There's my little cabinette, which was totally comfortable. Full disclosure, 5 years ago, I went on a cruise into the Northwest Passage to see the Arctic. So yes, I am an example of ego travel. I wanted to see the South Pole before it melted. On the cruise, I was struck when I discovered, because there was lectures every night about everything, that humans have never been indigenous to Antarctica. Humans cannot survive without imported support. The environment is stark and unforgiving. The only human history started in the 1850s with white Western men discovering the 7th continent and commercially draining the waters of Wales. This is an old abandoned British whaling station. Over here, we have the Argentinian Science Research Center, which has been shuttered because of the change in the environmental policies. There's high biohazard concerns, and so we had to clean our boots and our gear before, during, and after. When we walked on shore, we couldn't sit, we couldn't kneel, we couldn't put our backpacks down. We had to use their trekking poles. So there was very big concerns that we as humans didn't pollute. Of course we will eventually, but Anyways, I also participated in a citizen science project to collect plankton, and that information was uploaded into an international database. So I did do a little bit good here. We saw some more penguins, part of the fantail family, chinstrap penguins, and Gen 2 penguins. Gray seals, wattle seals, and humpback whales. I was surprised actually about how much life there is in Antarctica. It was full of life. Trip note to mom, December 29th. I love gazing at the ice with all varieties of shapes, of shades of blue, gray, and white. These types of remote expeditions remind me of the ultimate power of nature. I always feel smaller and more insignificant within these landscapes. Also, I must admit, I feel profound grief witnessing the slow dissolution, the death of the ice, and preparing for the future realities of this great melting. So, Mom, this has been a poignant gift for me this holiday season, observing and sharing with you about this remote part of the world. Thank you, Mom, for gifting me the curiosity and courage to travel alone so far away. And I had to thank my mom because I was thanking the ice, and both are leaving us. When we went through the Lemaire Channel, which is famous for its, 1,000-foot high glaciers and ice, everyone sat on top on the panoramic deck or out in the bow looking where they were going. And yet I felt called to sit in the stern at the back of the boat in the quiet library and watch where we were coming from. For me, this was more poignant because I was saying goodbye to the ice, and I wanted to see it as it was leaving, as I was leaving. I also noticed the wake that the boat was creating and the impact that had on the ice. And that was not lost on me either, that being on this trip, being on this boat, traveling through this was impacting, hurting, hindering the pristineness of this environment. This one reminds me of a heart. And if you notice here, you can see little chunks of ice, and some of them look black. And at first I thought that it was soot. But what the expedition guide explained was that the darker the ice, the older it is. And this piece of ice actually was estimated to be around 10,000 years old. It was so dense and compressed. So we hauled this into our Zodiac and we looked at it and we touched it and we tasted it and realized it was indeed fresh water, which was kind of amazing. And then the expedition guide said, okay, now we're going to take it back to the boat and we're going to take it to the kitchen. It can be used. And there was a child, an 11-year-old child on the Zodiac. And the child said, no, we got to throw it back. No, we got to throw it back. And all the adults said, no, 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 we're going to take it with us. And so the child was getting upset. And I said, what's so important about this piece of ice going back to the water? And the child said, well, it has to go back to its family. And I went, oh my goodness, the kid gets it. And so I winked at the child, did a little head nod, and we both at the same time ran, grabbed the piece of ice and tossed it back over into the water. And we leaned over the pontoon and waved goodbye. And the ice bobbed up and down. And the child said, see, it's happy. It's going back to its family. Goodbye, goodbye. And I said in a loud voice, and thank you, thank you, thank you for helping keep our planet cool. Well, I think it's important that we do express gratitude. If we are going to places that are disappearing, that we express gratitude and thank those parts of the world that have helped support us. My intention for these Ecotravels was to experience the White Continent before it disappeared, but I ended up becoming an Antarctic ambassador. Now I have connection to, knowledge of, and passion for Antarctica. The Antarctic Treaty was signed in Washington on December 1st, 1959 by 12 countries, and the total number of parties to the treaties is now 56. And I'm kind of amazed a lot of people don't know this. And one of my ambassadorship things is to educate, is like, yeah, Antarctica is not owned by anybody. And I actually cling on to this as an example that maybe we can get our act together and work together because we've done it for Antarctica. I also am now becoming aware of the importance of krill. Krill is a tiny crustacean that exists in the frigid waters of the Southern Ocean. It's a key food source for whales, dolphins, and other animals, many of which migrate for thousands of miles to reach it. Recent years have seen the emergence of a fishery that they more like hoover them up, vast quantities of krill for use in multiple industries, including omega-3 supplements. Do you take omega-3s? Do you know where that comes from? Is it krill from Antarctica? Krill is also used in aquaculture feed, pet food, and cosmetics. So now I'm supporting a Sea Shepherd project to educate and to get this under control, because krill are a keystone species. Without krill, there's going to be lots of ecosystems collapsing. You can see from Punta Arenas, where I came in, I drove 5 hours up here in a bus with 10 other people to Eco Camp Patagonia. And I chose this place to kind of decompress from my cruise and to spend New Year's. And Eco Camp is an example of sustainable accommodation. It was designed and built with the intention of having minimal impact on the environment. To minimize the CO2 emissions, EcoCamp primarily uses renewable energy sources from 4 microturbines and from photovoltaic solar panels. It's a dome. They're all domes, and we know that geodesic domes are the strongest natural structure. Even they have big, huge community domes. The domes were designed with skylight windows to preserve heat from the sun during the day. EcoCamp uses various sustainable practices, such as composting toilets and a biofiltration system, which didn't stink, to help replenish the soil. They use, you can't take your own shampoo and soap, you have to use their biodegradable products. All their trash is separated, and they give all of their organic trash to pigs at a nearby farm. EcoCamp has been recognized as carbon neutral since 2007. At the end of each season, they offset all CO2 emissions from their hotel, offices, staff flights, and transportation by calculating the amount of CO2 produced and then investing in green projects such as solar stoves to families and individuals in India. And what I loved about this place, it was a totally off-grid. There was no Wi-Fi and no cell service. But I also loved Patagonia in general. It was just spectacular, breathtaking, and very special. When you're out in the wilderness, there's no consumeristic, human-centered holidays. It's all about the seasons and cycles of nature. So I didn't miss the holidays at the end of the year. Personal journal entry, January 1st. Patagonia is magical, with sweeping, spectacular vistas. The mountains, river valleys, hills, and plateaus encourage us to see the big picture, to see more than our own little lives. And for New Year's Day, I usually go on a first day hike. And this was just so special. I went on my own. I wandered on a trail. I had the whole trail to myself. Everybody else was hungover. I didn't care. I got up early and away I went. And I noted in my journal that my soul is fuller knowing that there are still beautiful, remote, pristine places on this planet. Here again, the guides, I have to say all the guides all over the continent are just passionate about conservation. They were graduate students, Ph.D, postdoctoral, even professors, all fully sharing their passion for conservation. And Javi here actually helped us go into a remote valley, and we tracked some wild horses for a while. That was really special. But Jave also does education with the farmers about stopping to shoot cats. And so now I'm also supporting the Pantera project. In Patagonia, they're known as pumas, but in another part of the world, there are cougars, mountain lions, panthers, and catamounts. There's actually a chapter in British Columbia as well, too, to help with this education and to protect these cats. They are definitely important part of the ecosystem. And the last little vignette I'll share is that of Machu Picchu, and this is eco-spiritual, and it's over tourism. I went twice to Machu Picchu, and the first time it poured rain, and actually I was so happy because the rain washed the tourists away. Machu Picchu is divided into 4 zones, and they only let 250 people into each zone each day. And and they have different time slots. You have to apply for passes months in advance. It's not easy to get to. From Cusco, you got to take a train into Machu Picchu village, and then from the village, you take a bus into the actual site. It's very controlled. You cannot take trekking sticks, and you have to prove you need to have support, and it has to be rubber tipped. Machu Picchu was declared a Peruvian historic sanctuary in 1982 and a UNESCO World Heritage Site in 1983. In 2007, Machu Picchu was voted one of the new 7 wonders of the world. And why did I go Machu Picchu? Well, this sounds cheesy, but I felt a calling. How could I go to South America, which a place I may never go to again, and not see these ancient ruins? And so my guide actually shared this quote with me. There are places where spirits live trapped among stones. Those places constructed by ancient man and today abandoned were so sacred that their energy continues to vibrate through the centuries. It is impossible to walk on those stones and not sense the clamor of the past and the enormous forces concentrated there. Even the most hurried tourist can feel the powerful presence. There are, however, persons with a special sensitivity who hear the call of those sites across thousands of miles of distance. They are the chosen, summoned by the spirits to give witness to their enduring existence. Isabel Allende was born in Lima, Peru, and is a Chilean and U.S. Author and educator. So I felt called, and I do acknowledge my privilege to actually be able to visit this very special place. And it was magical. It's very difficult to put into words the feeling here. Again, I was glad the weather was bad because rainy season had started, and I could find spots where I could actually just sit and meditate and feel the energy. On the second visit, I chose to actually climb Machu Picchu mountain, and it's 2,000 feet straight up on these ancient, old, 1,000-year-old steps. And it was one of the hardest things I've done in the last decade. I suffer from altitude sickness. Heights are not friendly to me, and yet I endured. I took 10 steps, waited, and let my heart calm down. And to me, this was part of my rite of passage. I was stepping further up into elderhood. And when I got to the top of the mountain, eventually, longer than most people would, my guide gave me a nice, beautiful piece of dark Peruvian chocolate. And while I was sitting there enjoying that, this young man came up to me and he said, "How old are you?" And I went, "I'm 67. Can I take your picture?" And I went, "Okay, what's so important about taking my picture and my age? You're the same age as my mom, and all she does is walk on a treadmill and tells me she's too old to go hiking with me. I want to show her that that's not true." So I guess part of my elderhood is role modeling. Anyways, took a picture, and asked him what his name was. He said, "Piotr." And I said, "Where are you from?" And he said, "Polonia." And I'm like, "Oh, well, that's something else we have in common because my dad is Polish." And I share this story because it was a big achievement for me, but also that on travels, serendipitous things, magical things happen that you can't, that are unexpected. And that's part of going on journeys for me. On the way back down the hill, my Indigenous guide actually and I did a cocoa leaf ceremony to the mountain, and we expressed gratitude to all those, to the mountain, and to all those before us and all those that would come after us, almost like a 7-generation pre-post thing. And that was my gift to the area. And yeah, it was special. When I got to the very bottom and had to sign out, because the safety is a big thing. You don't want to lose people they have, but they don't want to. I noticed that only 25 people attempted the climb, only 12 people finished, and I was the oldest by a decade for either man or woman. And that felt really good. That was a real sense of accomplishment as I strided through elderhood. But enough about me. So have we answered any questions about the paradox of travel? I don't know, you'll have to answer that question or consider it yourself. Will I travel again? Maybe in another 5 years, but I will be honest and I will consider the why. Am I traveling to stroke my ego, or am I going to be focused on the care and concern of the more than human world? I will always find ways to offset travel's heavy impact, to leave our social, ecological world a better place. And I also believe in sharing and talking and being curious and reflecting and supporting the places post-travels. I still support efforts up in the Arctic long after I've been back. So it's not a one and done in some of these efforts. Trip note to Mom, January 11th. I won't soon forget feeling the pulse of the earth and the spectacular remote rugged landscapes I had the privilege to travel through. This was the hidden surprise, Mom, experiencing the haunting beauty of our one and only planet. So thanks for encouraging me to write these notes to you, Mom. The process made me journal and really think about the experiences instead of just checking off an itinerary full of bucket list items. Many memories from this travel experience have made it to my highlight reel. I will be reflecting, writing, and sharing with various groups about this expedition for many years and many months to come. I'm complete. Thank you for listening. And I'll just pause right now. Maybe. Okay, let's stop the share. Come on.